Alafia, peace and blessings, family, peace and blessings. So, welcome to the Ancestral Reverence playlist on the Ashe African Spirituality Experience channel. I'd like to thank everybody for the love and support with the channel. And as promised on our last video, the art of ancestral communication, I briefly spoke about the upcoming multi-part series of the tour and the history of the Elmina slave dungeons, the most horrific atrocities known to mankind, the Ma'afa, Transatlantic slave trade, the site where many of our ancestors were disposed of from their homeland to the transatlantic slave trade and the diaspora. So ladies and gentlemen, this is part one. I hope you all enjoy it. I appreciate you. See you on the way out. Peace.
Thank you, my dear viewers, for taking the time out to watch this. I know some of you might have gone through this castle before. Others, this will be your first time of having a look at it. But let me tell you, this story is so sad, is so painful, and indeed depressing. But the motivation to do this is not to make you bitter, sad, or angry, but to help us learn from the horrible mistakes of the past. Try to correct them by way of taking an informed and humane decision, so together we can stop this from reoccurring in any form in the future. Behind me is Elmina Castle, also known as St. George's Castle. This castle is situated here in Elmina, central region of Ghana, about 167 kilometers from the national capital Accra and 20 kilometers from the regional capital Cape Coast. Elmina had been in existence well over 155 before Christopher Columbus first came over here, and about 165 years before he discovered wherever he got to. Now I want to give you the opportunity to go through town to see what Elmina has to offer, and then after that we will meet at the castle to tell the story of the dungeons. Thank you very much and keep watching.
You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. You've been kept down for much too long. Stand up, please, and say I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land. All will be happy and gay. Come with me
History has it that in 1471 was the first time the Portuguese came to this very place, Elmina. They came basically at the time to trade. And the system of trade back then was the barter system. So they were giving out goods for goods. When they were coming, they brought along guns, gunpowder, spirituous, liquors, trinkets, among others, and exchanged these for gold, ivory, later on the other spices. Now, one major thing the Portuguese were interested in was gold. Incidentally, the locals were giving them so much. So they came to believe the town would be full of gold. And for that simple reason, they called this place Amina or Damina, meaning the mine in their language. So it was this word that would not be pronounced properly. And this word was corrupted to today's word Elmina. And invariably, it became the name of the town. There is another school of thought that suggests the Arabs were the first to be here. And seeing the place having a kind of a natural harbor or port, they called the place Elmina, meaning the port. But the locals would believe the Portuguese more than the Arabs. So they believe the Portuguese Damina gave Elmina to the town and not as the Arabs suggest. But that does not mean we never had a name before they came. We did. And our name was Anom Ansa. Anom Ansa literally means that when you drink, it doesn't get finished or inexhaustible kind of water. 1482, that's 11 years after the Portuguese had first come, led by their captain called Don Diego de Azambuja. The Portuguese came to see the chief of the town called Nana Kwamina Ansa, negotiated for this plot of land, and had this huge edifice built. It is interesting to learn that the chief wasn't enthusiastic with the Portuguese intention initially to stay. He felt cultural differences was going to be a problem in the future. And just like a traditional ruler, he said that friends are better friends if they don't live together. But upon persuasions and assurances, he gave in. And this will be the first time in the history of the world a West African chief would legally transfer a title to a plot of land to an European, and for that matter, Portuguese. Materials for construction, most were imported, and the color of the brick will help us understand which side of the structure was built by the Portuguese and which side of it was done by the Dutch. All red bricks are Portuguese, and all yellow bricks are Dutch. So with that, you can easily identify the places that were built by the Portuguese and the places that were built by the Dutch. But then the Portuguese will have two reasons why they built this castle or the dungeons. One, to trade. Two, give out rooms for the missionaries who were to come in to spread Christianity. And when they came at first, they were Catholics. From the very onset, when they were into gold and ivory and others, the rooms on the ground floor were being used as storerooms or warehouses as planned. But then from the 1500s, it shifted gradually from gold and others to human trade. And when this happened, the rooms that were initially storerooms were then converted to holding places where the Africans were kept. At the peak of it, the whole structure would talk of a minimum of about 1,000 at a time. 600 of them men, 400 women. One thing very, very difficult, and everybody would like to ask a question on that, would be the fact that yes, the Portuguese shifted from gold trade to human trade. But why? You have to understand, processes by which somebody is made to serve another had been with all the races in the time past. So in that sense, the Africans in themselves had an idea before the foreigners came. But The system we had in our culture was not as the Europeans or the foreigners introduced. In fact, it is very difficult to use the word slave to describe that person under the system we had in place before the foreigners came. In fact, to even suggest the person is an indentured servant, to me, is again difficult. But we can make it simple. The person should be seen as a servant because in most cases, that person had rights. He could marry, raise free kids, acquire properties, pay the price on his head, he'll be a free person. It was very difficult in most cases identifying that person from, from a regular person in the society, the servant from a regular person in the society. Why? Because he was clothed, fed, had shelter just like any other person. One thing that happened to the system that was even unique was the fact that the so-called slave could shift from that status to a royal status. How would that happen? One, when the man proved to have managerial ability or military skill, he could become the caretaker of the master's household. Descendants of such became royals. Women got married into the system. They ceased to be servants or slaves and from then had royal descendants. Some managed to shift from one community. They began a community for themselves. And by that shift, they all became royals. And Ghana here and now, there are so many chiefs in the villages, communities, and towns whose ancestors were not royals. In fact, they even want to see them as slaves. But by hard work, marriage, or the shift, descendants all over are chiefs. And partly because of that, it becomes a taboo to refer to anybody as a slave. Indeed, to strengthen that institution, they would tell you that you do not point to where a person is coming from. That is to say, that if I tell you I am from Elmina, that ends the discussion. No probing. I dare say that but for the coming into being of this industry, issues concerning slavery and trade will not be talked about in our communities. Why? Because with the accounts, for example, there isn't any extended family system that wouldn't have a line or two which will not be part of it originally but brought in. So the mothers are the ones to continue with the generations. So in one generation where we have about 15 boys and 2 girls, that is to say that only 2 girls are those who are going to sustain the next generation. So then, to make the system work, they will bring in girls from other side to beef up the family for the next generation. So these are the ones that were not part of it originally, but brought in. But they become part and parcel of the family. So much so, nobody points to them to say anything. So then, if this issue had not come up for discussion, you will not get people in our various communities discussing it because it's not a subject to be discussed. Everybody is part of the family. There were 3 basic ways one could become a servant before the foreigners came. 1, you could talk of prisoners of wars. 2, those convicted for some offenses. 3, those who were given out as pawns for debts. Meaning that what? If you go and borrow, the time was due for you to pay. You don't have whatever it is to pay. You could let somebody go and serve. And the period under which the person serves, he or she will be seen to be a servant, or worse situation, a slave. And this was already in the setup before the foreigners came. Again, I'm quick to let people know that much as we would agree the Portuguese got here first in 1471, is not in any way to suggest it was the first time they started taking Africans from West Africa. No. They were taking Africans long before they got here. The first time is said to be 1440. Others will push it to 1441. Some said they had 10. Others said they had 12. From a point that later on became known as Rio de Oro. Rio de Oro simply means river of gold, and this place should be somewhere up Senegal thereabout. To them, they had only one reason for taking the 10 or the 12, serving as a proof that they finally gotten in touch with the Africans. Interesting to learn, of the 10 or the 12 they took initially, 3 or so of them were said to be of noble background, therefore had to negotiate for them to be brought back. And in return for these 3, they gave the Portuguese 10 people in their place. They got gold from there, and that will be the first time they will get gold from West Africa. Hence, they will call that particular spot where they got these Rio de Oro. Let us not forget, taking them to Portugal was only to serve as a proof that they've gotten in touch with the Africans. But when the prince saw them, he was happy for 2 reasons. One, some were to be educated to serve as interpreters for the Portuguese coming back to West Africa. And 2, as they put it, the most intelligent ones to be trained to become missionaries to hasten the spread of Christianity here. But sadly, when they got settled, they never came back as intended or planned. They rather ended up in the palaces as slaves. And from that time, no other European came over here and went back without African captives. Making us understand, they started taking Africans 30 years before they first got to Elmina. And 41 years later, this was built. And that's more the reason why most people believe the Portuguese never built the castle only for gold and ivory and others, but also for human trade. Why? Because long before it was built, they're already taking Africans across. But you know, they try to let us understand that those who were taken to Portugal, Spain, were not treated the same way as Africans were being treated over here before they came. But then almost the same. And then the religious ones would also say that, well, by taking the Africans there and making Christians out of us, they were then doing us a favor, because by that, they save our souls and heaven comes in and all that. But the whole situation changed when the Spaniards got to the so-called new discoveries. And they talk about the fact that not long after going there, silver and gold mines were opened. Sugar, tobacco, cotton plantations were established. Yes, they wanted the riches. They wanted the wealth. But they were not ready to work the hard way. So they subjected the natives to the work. And the story says, Spanish brutalities, overwork, and effects of European diseases decimated the indigenous population. So one man who is actually accused, Bartholomew de las Casas, supposedly a Catholic missionary who was sympathy on the natives, suggested for us to be used. One school of thought suggests he said what he said based on the fact that we're already doing the same work under similar climatic conditions, therefore better substitute. Another school of thought suggests he even said never had souls. And that really got my attention, because not long before this time we had the souls they wanted to save. And a few years later we lost it. How did we lose it? But you know, to prove him wrong or right, 1512, 1515, some Africans were taken from Spain, some say to Hispaniola, others say to Santo Domingo, where they were tried. And true to the man's word, these ones proved physically fit. In fact, it was established that one African in strength was to 4 the natives. So then demands for Africans then started. And that came as the beginning of that unfortunate story. The story of misery and pain. The story of the forced exodus of Africans from their motherland to different places. They ended up all over the world. And this story became known as the Transatlantic slave trade.
Lafayette, peace and blessings, family. So that was part one of the Elmina Slave Dungeons tour. I hope you guys all appreciated the information, the knowledge, the history, the lecture, and also I hope you appreciated the opportunity to go behind and see the scenes of a heinous crime that was committed amongst our ancestors. I say love, peace, and power to the all-powerful mighty ancestors, and I thank you all for joining us. We'll have part two coming next week. We out. Peace.